Uh, Again, thank everybody for your work and participation on the Affordable Housing Coalition as a whole. I'd ask Marla just for some time, as I have to jump off about 10:30, hard stop. One of our agenda items below after our updates from each of the subcommittees speaks to the role of the Affordable Housing Coalition. And for me, I know that's a conversation we've been having probably the last couple months, and just kind of talking about where we are, what is our role moving forward, how do we take the work conversation we're having now, what is the next phases of that. And I've been thinking about that specifically on kind of what are some actions items we can potentially take, and not fully synthesizing all of our conversations, but just in part to hopefully kind of bring some action that can kind of pave the way forward from my perspective. But I would love to hear from everybody else on kind of what folks' thoughts are, because it feels like, for me, there's amazing work that's happening in our subgroups, great conversations that are going on in reference to action items and things we think we want to do that'll help us chip away at the larger challenge of dealing with affordable housing in the community as a whole. But what I don't believe we have yet is a clear, concrete understanding of what that X is that we're solving for when it comes to the commission as a whole. And I think it'll be good for us to really get down to what that X is for us, so that our work can be a little bit more targeted towards the solutions we want to see there, and that we don't get too far down on one particular area, and then understanding that our actions require approval from another group, and then we get there and they're like, well, we don't like any of this stuff. And so there's some things that we can do that may spark some other groups moving. So my thoughts were, one, as we know, one of the big things that we talk about often is those 15,000 units that we need over the next, 10 years? It may be shorter now, but the 15,000 units that we need over the next 10 years. What we've not truly defined is in what categories do we need those specific units? How many units do we need that are in the single family? How many units do we need that are multifamily? How many units of senior housing or group home or supportive community? Where are the categories that are necessary? And then comparing that to what is the naturally occurring rate of those units on an ongoing basis. So each year we get X number of single family development, X number of multifamily, and then here's the gap on an ongoing basis. And I'm just using math I pull out the air. If that's 500 that we're missing across that realm, that then gets us in a better position to make solutions on what do we need to do to get the 100 additional single family units that we need each year. What do we need to do to get the 50 extra multifamily, the 25 group home units? When we get those numbers, it makes it a little bit more targeted in terms of how the solutions are being driven. And then it comes back to the bigger picture that all the answers aren't here with this group. And we talked through in some of the subgroups around the summit conversations, or do we do something to pull additional folks into the conversation. But I think having that data and that information makes it easier to pull folks in to then target towards the solutions. But absent of that, I think it begins to be a little bit more challenging on what our actions actually are and what the outcomes that we get in the process. And so with that in mind, there were kind of three things that I thought we could, as we move forward on how we can do. A couple things are clearly apparent that I think could be some requests or actions. One is, we know for the units that are below market, we already know that to do that we don't have the financial resources in this community to make it all happen, and we got to be creative on that. And we've heard consistently around, how do we help the city locally and folks get resources? So we talk about the conversation around the bond. That could be some things that we look at, hey, this is one piece we need to create more resources. Two, one of the things that we are within the creation of this group was in terms of recommendations on how some city resources are used. And I look to you, Marla, if you say, heck no, we're already appropriating those funds from other places. But as it was said in one of the hundreds of housing meetings I've been a part of, and actually just recently, one we did this past Tuesday with Bethesda. Kevin Cheshire made it really, really plain for me in his commentary. He said, "We've been doing affordable housing as an extra credit project." That's the term that he used, and it really just brought it down to clear terms of we can't wait to have someone who wakes up every day who's helping to push this work specifically around affordable housing. And so I wonder, Marla, if there's space within existing housing bonds that we could start that process, understanding that there may be the hope that that person transitions to some group that is not city led, but as we've kind of again centrally talked about, is there a need for a new group to be formed and created? And so is there an opportunity to potentially use some resources there to recruit someone who could wake up every day starting to help build out that system of what we need, with a forward looking of this person may not remain as a city employee, but hopefully transition into some new entity that is helping to push this work forward. But at least we have the resources to kickstart it and get it, because even here with this group, we're all volunteering to participate. So the time that's committed every day of our time is not, fully engaged on just solving these issues. And then the third and final one was, if that person was able to be pulled in, tasking that person to help in a mid-year 2021, hopefully we could have some kind of thing where we are bringing that data, those numbers, to this larger group of people in whatever housing summit kind of thing could look like, to now say we don't want to make all the recommendations from this group, but we really want to do what this is about, of being coalition building, of bringing these folks together, say, these are the numbers, this is what we know, this is a challenge, here's some thoughts on how we solve it, but we want this to be community driven and around how we develop some of these solutions that are part of it. I know I said a whole lot in a bunch at the same time, but I wanted to get it all out and just kind of prick some brains on if anybody feels similarly so, or thoughts, or Derwin, you're just totally off on an island out there somewhere.
I'll weigh in first, particularly on the idea about maybe the city bringing in a staff person, creating a position, and then spinning out an entity. There has been some talk. I was part of a conversation a few weeks ago about the possibility of seeing if we could recruit LISC to come back and possibly, serve in that kind of intermediary role, and potentially, kind of coordinate and support maybe some of what you're talking about. We've got to do some outreach to LISC, and that's on my to-do list, actually. And so I think that there is a recognition that we need some capacity in this community in order to really carry the water. That's far greater than what we as staff and community development can do, unless we grew exponentially. So I think that where your head is in line with the thoughts of some other folks, that we need to start looking outward. And I think that where we are is probably needing to find a both and, in the sense that it takes some time to put the infrastructure in place to bring a LISC back. And so, I think the idea I'm thinking is, are we on a reasonable path in the meantime to try to get something going? And I think that's the biggest thing. And I think this also kind of speaks to the conversations we were having previously around like the funders collaborative, or I always get the name wrong. Ryan, you can help me out. But how you pull all of those, for instance, banking institutions and other potential investors, to that round table, if you will. It takes a minute to build that kind of infrastructure. But I think there's a relationship between what you're proposing and even our need to do that kind of work, because it really will speak to that need to bring more resources to bear. So where the first possible action you mentioned might have been the need for another housing bond. That by itself is just a part of it, right? So we're still going to need those other resources to leverage. So I actually see some of these as kind of symbiotic. I think we need to be working on all of those things together. But I say that to say I do believe that what you're sharing is consistent with some of the other thinking that I've been hearing.
Marla, I was thinking, you mentioned LIST and the Funders Collaborative. Certainly, the Funders Collaborative took the place of LIST when LIST left. And so my comment mostly is that LIST is a local initiative, which means that locally we have to raise those dollars anyway. So it just seems to me whether we have a list or not, we still are going to rely on this local community in order to fund this, whatever movement we make toward, doing some work towards this housing. So, I mean, I having a person to me seems like whether we have the list model or not, we need the person, we need the funds dedicated to this. And so that's going to require this local community coming up with those funds.
Mm-hmm. And I know Ryan had reached out to me and maybe can share a little bit, but he's facilitating a conversation for me with some of the folks at Self-Help, which is, they can be a local arm. And I know that they're supporting or managing that's the Durham loan fund, right, Ryan?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
No, I didn't mean to cut you off. Yeah, so they were participating in organization in that loan fund. And so, as we've had these same conversations about LISC or, who could be this kind of local champion or manager of some of the resources we've talked about if it wasn't going to sit within the city, knowing that Self-Help has played a similar role in Durham, thought it might be good to at least have the conversation. That's obviously more in their backyard than we are. At worst, maybe we can learn a little bit from their experience, and at best maybe intrigue them enough to come over here and play a role as well. I assume everybody's pretty familiar with LISC, but with Self-Help, but they're a pretty interesting entity in that they're a CDFI in their own right, so they manage and lend investment dollars and debt, what have you, but they also have a development arm. And they were in that entity, they were able to bring some non-traditional players to the table. The city is participating. I believe the Duke Endowment or something tied with Duke is participating. So it's not just kind of city government and financial institutions. So that one particularly came to mind when looking at maybe unique models that work in, let's say, smaller towns that don't have as much corporate support like a Charlotte or an Atlanta.
And what's great when you mentioned about the Duke connection is the work that Tom and I have been doing with Novant and Wake Forest Baptist, and recognizing, especially Wake Forest Baptist, saying they've got corpus if they want to invest in housing, that would make a great vehicle for them to maybe do something like that. I'm looking forward to talking with the folks with self-help for one, and certainly, that's information that we can bring back to the next meeting, get the full understanding of how they operate and provide you all with the benefit of our conversation as we look at potential models, and even too to think about the possibility of a housing bond. That could be part of our contribution to whatever. So if we looked at the LISC model, for instance, and the local fundraising that's required, well, that might be how we, quote unquote, kind of seed our contribution to that, as well as maybe what Wake Forest Baptist or Novant could do, and any others around the table, any of our banking partners or what have you. Because I think it's a similar kind of situation in Charlotte in terms of the kinds of folks who are at the table and have made investments in that particular fund. Because what they did, if I'm not mistaken, and Ryan, you might be able to help me here, they created a local housing trust fund. And a lot of these investments are going into that trust fund. And that's a conversation that has come up as well. Do we create a trust fund, and then whatever investment dollars can be identified actually go into that trust fund? Is that the way they're doing it, Ryan?
They actually have a dual path in Charlotte, so you're right. They used the housing bond to fund the trust fund, and it was a $50 million bond. I think they're already talking about a second one there as well. And then they went out, and their goal was to raise another $50 million in private capital from LISC or other, LISC manages from others. I don't know that we quite got to that goal, but and generally the LISC fund and the housing trust fund kind of jointly invest in deals. It's not exclusively together, but a lot of times they each take a piece of the gap in an affordable deal and take it on in a slightly different structure, I think.
And for those of you who may not be fully familiar with the LISC, unless the models change significantly, in addition to some of the technical capacity that LISC brings, they also contribute loan dollars and, depending on the situation, some grant dollars. So they kind of leverage what your local money is. And so it kind of enlarges the pot of available funding for deals.
And I guess for me, the question is, I agree with all, whether it's LISC or there's a different model, self-help. We haven't, as a community, settled in on kind of, I think there's a sense needs to be another group, needs to be something out there that's working. Haven't yet settled in on what that is or what that will look like. And I guess for me, the question is, do we wait to figure that out before we try to get someone who's helping to facilitate this on a day-to-day basis, or does that kind of individual help to facilitate the end goal? Just because I'm just thinking about capacity and what all that takes to even get to that point of what we think should happen. That's why that thought about a person being in place to help get us there.
Well, let me get over to something else that Derwin had mentioned early on when he was talking, because it really hit me. The saying, you do what you measure. And I think as he was kind of going through the different categories of types of affordable housing and trying to, us needing to answer the question, well, what is it that we're trying to achieve? You've got it broken down by owner and rental, and you've got then multifamily and single family and group housing, and how much of that is new construction and how much of that can be reuse or rehab of existing buildings. How much is below market, 50 to 80% of median income, below 50%, 80 to 120. Those are all things that, if we're going to be trying to develop the financing infrastructure and the development infrastructure to do that, we've got to know what we're shooting for. And I guess what I'm wondering, in order to get to the answer to the question that Derwin brought up, is that something that staff can help us with in terms of looking at the market studies that have already been done, any other data that we have to kind of be able to identify some numbers that we should be shooting for among that total category of affordable housing needed, whether it's 15,000 or whatever, what shares of it are in these different categories, so we know what we're trying to shoot for in terms of applying these financing mechanisms and development partnerships or whatever to attack each of those segments that we're trying to shoot for.
Yeah, I'm sure that we could get with the planning department and try to suss some of that out. I think there's a portion of that that's actually in that housing study and needs assessment. Some of that is in there already. So the question is, how do we, further break it out or what have you? But I'll have to go back and take another look at that, the needs assessment, because I do think that there was some analysis of the different types at the different income thresholds.
Yeah.
So I just, yeah. So I think we kind of have some of that. I think the question is, what would we propose in terms of a strategy for attack? And I think that's one part of it. I think also in conjunction with that is kind of getting back to that overarching, what's the plan, and how do we create an overarching, let's just say a 10-year plan for getting to meeting that need. So I think, alongside, certainly just starting to look more closely at the data that we have, how do we go about starting the process of engaging community around creating what that plan is? Because I think that if we expect that one critical component of it is going back to the citizens and asking for another bond initiative, I would expect, especially with the rise of some of the advocacy that we've had here lately, that, we're going to have gone to community and engage community around what the needs are. Mm-hmm. So, I think at some point we've got to look at what is that process going to be, so that the community voice helps also inform whatever the ultimate plan is.
Yeah, I just think having those numbers in mind about what we're shooting for in the different segments will help us kind of fine tune our message and our conversations that we have with not only people who need and advocate for affordable housing, but the folks that we're trying to set up partnerships with in terms of financing and development and all that.
Absolutely. And my hope is that in the near term, from a staffing perspective, we'll be able to provide, some of that right now, the information that's needed, as we kind of work toward what the ultimate plan or strategy would be. We'll do what we can, and we'll tap planning for those areas that are kind of outside of what we're able to do or have the capacity to do. So we're definitely able to step in wherever we can.
And thinking about the structure, one of the things that's to me that's advantageous of having it be a private or a public-private entity is the ability to go out and get private dollars to actually, I'm involved with the Partners Ending Homelessness. I'm the chair of the board this year over in Greensboro, and they have a weird continuum of care set up over there compared to others, and so it is evolved as a
We do too.
public-private partnership over there. And what's that?
I said we do too.
Yeah. So watching it evolve, it's been messy over the last 2 years, but watching it evolve, it's a structure I think we can kind of borrow from or kind of keep in mind, because they use a lot of private dollars to pay for the people that are, to pay the salaries. Going out and getting those private funds helps pay for the people who are doing the work and I agree with Derwin that we need, it really does need to be somebody's, what they wake up and think about first thing in the morning and what they're thinking about right before they go to bed, and they're living and breathing this. So, I do like the idea of a private entity, that a nonprofit that has a board structure. The great thing about the continuum of care structure is it gets all the stakeholders engaged. It's not easy, but nobody said it would be. And watching with good leadership, watching what that structure can do is, and there's somebody running the COC board now over there that has done a remarkable job in directing them. You throw, it's like any other nonprofit though, you're only as good as the board and the leadership and the folks involved, but it's also, quite frankly, they're kind of set up for community engagement. So I do think that offers a lot of possibilities if we look at a structure like that.
Before Liz came the last time, there were some people who helped to sort of, I think, see what the environment was like in terms of funding. And that was Scott Weirman and Mann from, I think that was BB&T. They sort of went around the community and sort of got commitments from the funding from the private sector to be able to fund a local initiative. And so do we have any idea of what that looks like? Have we begun to prime the pump here?
Well, it's certainly not from a city staff perspective. I mean, other than, the outreach you and I did with BB&T, now Truist. But certainly that's not something that we've been able to do at the staffing level. That kind of creates a little challenge for us at staff to go out and do that piece.
Yeah, so I would agree. We need someone that does wake up every morning doing this.
Some of this in my mind bleeds a little bit into what I think the discussion we wanted to have later around the Durham Community Land Trust. And, I think that if you look at what they're able to do, it seems like they are part of that spectrum of entities. It sounds like, and Durham's maybe got a more robust one than we do, but they're at least one of the organizations that wakes up every day and thinks about it. In our earlier conversations about community land trusts, I think we focused a lot on the ability to sell homes, but they're even doing some rental housing in those neighborhoods as well, which I thought was impressive. And one of the questions and things that I haven't gotten my head quite around on a CLT is, is there a model for them to get to kind of quote unquote sustainability, where they're generating enough revenue from the real estate aspect of the business to not have to rely so much on, grant and philanthropic giving and things of that nature. And so that's just one of the things, again, I feel like it bleeds together a little bit. That's a question I had about, where they're heading, especially with the rental piece of it. And why it bleeds together for me is that, I think one of the things that we ran into with the Funders Collaborative is folks just got kind of funder fatigue, supporting the same organizations at the same levels with kind of similar outcomes every year. And, a lot of especially the foundations wanted to shift to other focuses. And so I could see, going around and trying to get buy-in for something like this, if there was a defined kind of off-ramp, if you will, where you could fund it and then there was a potential for it to be sustainable or step down over years. I don't know that that's something that you have to get commitment to up front, but at least it provides that potential, like, hey, we could see this, we either keep our funding and it grows exponentially, or we can step out of it, but it still is sustainable. So just a thought.
Well, I think also, though, another potential strategy or model could be.
Hey, Marla, I don't want to cut you off. I just want to let you all know I'm over my time,
Okay.
and so I'll try to catch up on any of the notes in the conversation. But again, I hate to light the fire and then run out the room. So
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, thank you for teeing this up, and we'll continue the conversation, and we'll catch up with you.
okay, I'm sorry about that. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye. So one of the things I was going to mention was, where the city is taking an approach now of doing RFPs, right? Because we know that the capacity that we have here is limited with our nonprofits. So if, we to do like Derwin did, come up with a number. So we want to do 2,000 units a year at these particular types of units, price points, the whole 9 yards. We've got X amount of money that we can put into a deal and or land. Then you do the RFP, and then whoever has the capacity responds to the RFP. And because I'm seeing a lot of that happening in Raleigh, so rather than relying on nonprofits who may or may not give you what you're looking for, so to your point, Ryan, about, well, we're supporting people at this level every year, but we don't have, a whole lot that's coming from it. You kind of not necessarily turn it on its head, but you have a slightly different approach where it really does become a performance-based kind of system. You have a contract. This is what you do. You meet the contract, you get paid, right? So it may be that we come up with some hybrid or different type of model, in terms of how we go about getting the units produced. It is not just we are providing all of the operating and investment to the nonprofits. Did that make sense, what I just outlined?
I think so. I mean, Marla, it does make sense. I think if I heard you right, one of the things I've enjoyed about watching, the group I mentioned before, partners, is, really they're paid for their expertise. They used to be the COC, and then HUD said you can't do that, and they split them apart. And so what they do is they basically staff, on a contract basis, all the expertise that's required for, so they handle all the HUD funding, they handle all the private funding, they go out, they do they manage. And I think if I heard you correctly, that's kind of what you're talking about, is somebody that would be in charge of managing all the entities and doing an environmental scan, seeing what's out there, get matchmaking, putting people in the right place. Is that what I was hearing?
No, not exactly. I kind of moved beyond that piece, which I understand we definitely need to, how we actually get units in the ground, without the concern of, are we supporting organizations that aren't in fact producing, right? Okay. And so by us issuing an RFP, like for instance, staff is currently developing a request for proposals to complete the build out of Ridgewood subdivision, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to put that on the street to developers, period. You can be for-profit or nonprofit, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we're going to do them in groups of 5 or 7, I can't remember, maybe groups of 7 units, and you get a group of units to build, and that's it. We are paying you as a developer to put the stuff in the ground. We're not worried about your operating cost and all of those kinds of things. You're a developer, you come to us like any other developer, pencils a deal, right? And so that gets us out of some of those situations that may have been present before, where there was a lot of support for the development community, but there wasn't a lot of production that could justify the level of support because, and this is just the way it is with a lot of nonprofits, they are sometimes, hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, right? And so, they needed operating support. And so when you become the only source of operating support, or they have to spend a great deal of time finding the operating support, then that impedes the ability to actually do the development. And at least that's been my experience in other places, and I suspect might have been some of what had happened here. But when you just go to a straight RFP strategy, anybody who has the capacity can prove the capacity. So you got to have your bonding, insurance, your financing, and all of that. I mean, it's just you're trying to do the deal. You get your developer fee when you do your deal. Makes it cleaner.
Mm. Sounds more like a transportation deal.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, because they just do the RFQs and RFPs, and yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Those with the expertise come in and get it done. And I know that in the grand scheme of things, we would love to be able to build more of our nonprofit capacity. And so we are looking at some other opportunities where potentially, if it's a really huge deal, and I'll just use the Choice Neighborhoods Initiative as an example. I don't know that this is actually what's going to happen, but when you look at a deal like the transformation of Cleveland Avenue Homes, is that an opportunity then to take a nonprofit or two who can kind of shadow and come behind or work alongside or whatever with McCormick Barron Salazar to really see how you do these things, right? Because I think we still need to build our own local capacity, but I think it's a both and. We've got to get the units in the ground, which means we've got to open up the opportunities for a broader group of developers to come in and do the work. But we also need we also need through this process to build some more capacity so that we're taking care of our folks here at home who want to do this work and are mission driven. I hope that made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I guess at this juncture, are there any particular takeaways that you're looking for with staff before we kind of go back up to the top of the agenda?
I mean, if I had to put I can't say anything specifically, Marla, but I think where Derwin's going, I think a lot of us are feeling the same way, which is we need to, I think we as an entity just need to start showing result, taking action. I mean, we've been meeting and we've been talking and planning, but I think the time has come. And I think that would you agree that that's kind of where Derwin's coming from? Like we need to start taking action, taking some concrete steps. Mm-hmm. And I don't know specifically what that requires from staff, but I think, I don't know, I'm with him in that. I'm with him that it would be nice, if we can start showing some completed steps of some kind, I think we'll start getting some momentum and engagement.
Well, one of the things I've spoken about with him, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this before to our larger group or maybe when in some of the working groups, that I think at the end of the day, we need a plan, right? A multi-year housing plan. What's the plan? So to his point, how many units, what price points annually? That plan needing to be informed by community, right? And so I think, because I think he's got two things. One, we need to get to so many units a year. Okay, we got to figure out the plan, the strategy, and we got to have the community at the table to do that. And then you have the separate part of how you're going to staff it. I think that what I want to offer and ask you to consider is, should one of the next things we do collectively here is talk about what do we need to do to start creating a plan? Because that and the staffing can run on parallel tracks, right? Because even we get the staff today, if we don't have a plan, we have a staff person, right? So we still need that plan for execution purposes. Right. We need the plan for the fund development purposes. So I would recommend that we give some serious thought to how to initiate a formal planning process, plan development process, to get to the number of housing units we need. And like I said, staff can start to, pull data, go back, suss out, extract, data that's in the housing study and needs assessment, and collaborate with the planning department to update anything we need to update. But that's just one element of it. We still have to have some conversations writ large with other stakeholders and community. And that data can come to them as well so that they can understand what the community is confronted with, right? So that, collectively we can decide on how we want to do it. And I know I've mentioned to a few folks before the model, and I'm not saying this is exactly what we do, but this was my most recent experience in a community-driven housing plan creation, and that was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. It's called Housing NOLA, and it was a 10-year housing plan to go in and replace what's been lost and preserve what they can. Very, very heavily community engaged. And, I'd recommend in any of you, if you have, some time, to take a look at that. I participated in it a little, just because of the position I was in when I was living in Louisiana. But it was a very robust process, and it's definitely a model that we could learn something from.
Yeah, I think having the clear targets in terms of numbers of what types we're looking for is clearly we gotta have and articulate that in order to go much further. I think the other thing that this group our coalition has been doing that's been valuable, and we need to finish developing it, is developing the tools that we have in order to create that. So the discussions we've been having about things like community land trust and the financing mechanisms, maybe a partnership with self-help. How do public housing, the public housing bonds, things like that. Those fit into how you actually create it. So I think we've got to kind of continue to develop those while at the same time we're developing the numbers and the targets there, because those two things working together then can give us something to start with.
all of a sudden I just had an image of Grand Central Station in New York. You've got all of these lines coming in, So I know earlier I talked about things working on parallel tracks. I think it's bigger than that, right? Like you said, we've got a lot of inputs to get us to that central hub, which is those units that need to be developed, right? And so a lot goes into that, and even like in talking about the land trust, one of the things I have down here, and I know we're kind of jumping over, but under what was the next steps down in the discussion section of the agenda, after the role of AAHC, it had community boot camp. And actually, that's something that came up in the conversation with the For Everyone Home team a few days ago around community land trusts, because there's a lot of interest in it. A lot of people may not understand all of the ins and outs about it. And one of the things we talked about was, well, do we get with the Center for Community Progress and Grounded Solutions Network, who are the two primary entities that talk about shared equity ownership models and things of that nature, and have them come and actually do what we call a boot camp, or do it via Zoom. But, folks can sign up and basically take a class, so kind of like everything you want to know about community land trust in, I don't know, 3 hours, I'm just making that up, right? And so and then this way, people who are really sincere about wanting to understand this and potentially create one, because they need to be community-based, they have the opportunity then to come and listen and learn and so forth, right? So looking at ways that we can educate or inform community, while we're trying to figure out all of the different things, because certainly the community land trust, I don't think is anything that needs to be spurred or led by the city. That's total community. So how do we get the information into the hands of the community? So that's why we threw out this idea of a boot camp the other day, right? By the same token, one of the things that I've talked a lot about within the city government is the city being a more, what's the word I'm looking for? A more proactive land banking entity. I mean, from a practical perspective, we're already land banking. The city owns a lot of land already. Some of it is, foreclosure from city loans to a whole host of other ways the city has come into ownership of land. Well, and we're also maintaining tons and tons of land, by mowing and cutting. Well, do we need to just actually go through the legal process to get those parcels into our actual possession, and then we can have a strategy for developing those parcels into affordable housing? Because we're already taking care of them, so we might as well own them and then put them back into productive use, right? So we've been kind of having those conversations, but that kind of speaks to how do we get land to develop more units, right? So I think we have a number of things. It's just, maybe getting to where all of those trains kind of pull into the station, and people can see all that they're bringing in to that central goal of getting those units developed. So yeah, there's a lot, and I think some of it's happening. It's just how do we get it to all coalesce?
Marla, may I just for a second? I like to just sit and listen and start thinking through everybody's thoughts as a facilitator. That's kind of how I operate. And Derwin, I'm sorry he had to jump off, because I really appreciate him allowing this kind of open thought session that we're having. And he alluded to some things, and you alluded to some things, and John alluded to some things that I think are worth bringing back. Derwin said, you know, he's part of all these different groups of affordable housing, and you're talking about the Grand Central Station and everything coming in, and John's mentioned some things. Maybe it's something to think about that we come up with one priority that will benefit all these other entities that we're aware of. I mean, I was sat in on another group yesterday, and you know, everybody knows the goal, 16,000, 15,000, whatever the number is, and everybody wants to try and get there. It's kind of like the vaccine. But we need to maybe figure out what one or two things we might be best at as opposed to all these other groups, and just focus on that. I don't know if that makes sense or not. And I don't know if, not being a political science guru, I don't know if under our mission we can do that. But that's just something I'm sitting here hearing, is that we all want to reach this goal, and we're all aware of all these elements that have to come to play to get there. And there are all these other entities besides us doing the same thing. So maybe if we just identified a couple and let everybody know this is where we're going to focus on funding. You guys, you know what the projects are that we need. You know we need the units. We can tell you how many of different types of units there are. We're going to start really focusing on funding. That's just an idea I'm throwing out there, but I don't know if that works or not.
Oh, I agree with your thinking. And I just reflected back on the housing NOLA plan, and it encompassed all of that, right? Again, they knew how many units they needed.
Right.
Then it was, okay, what does it take to get them? Over what period of time? And so the funding was baked into the plan, you know? So I think that as strange as it may seem, this group has actually done some of the elements. You started that, you know, around, you know, some of the stuff with the messaging and the glossary, because people are going to need to understand what terms mean. You know, we've started tapping some potential long-term partners and stakeholders, the medical community and so forth. And so I think that we've actually been touching on some of the elements that would need to feed into the creation of the plan. So we are probably in a better place than you might realize in the moment, because on the one hand, it might seem, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, but they're all elements that have to be a part of that overarching plan to meet the need that we know we have. So, but I certainly agree. Yeah. So what is that one thing, or what are those two things that get us to where it is we're trying to go, which is, you know, getting more units out here. Yeah. So what is that when you use the train analogy? Do we need a conductor? That gets back to the staff person that Darryl was talking about earlier, right? Yeah, so it's all interrelated. I mean, I would say without a doubt that the time that you all have spent and the things that you all have done have been very, very beneficial to getting to the ultimate goal. Everything has meaning and value. So I really think it's important for me to say that, having been a part of a process before, what's happened during your time together has been beneficial. And it's just part of the process. And, I've never seen sausage made. I hear about this whole thing about making sausage. It's not pretty. And, and yeah, like John said earlier about, stuff is hard. Nobody said it would be easy. I mean, that's what this is too. I mean, creating the housing plan in New Orleans took a couple of years before they had it to get, had it done. So if that's any consolation, and granted, it's a larger city. They had more resources, right? So not to say, it should take us twice that long or anything, but I still think we have the capacity to bring all of those things to bear that we need as well. I do agree that, being able to have a point person who can do a little bit more of the guiding and conducting and what have you is important. But it gets back to what is it you really want to accomplish at the end of the day?
Well,
Marla,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Marla, I think that if we don't have a plan, someone else is going to fill that gap. They're going to come up with a plan. Mm-hmm. And, I was on the call with Tom yesterday, and, this group is anxious, because they don't know if anything is being done, and so they're trying to solve the problem. What is it that we need to do? They're getting a list of all the developments that are taking place, all the ones that are shovel ready, all the ones that other people are working on. And the bottom line is they need money in order to do it. Mm-hmm. They need money. And so they're talking about some of the same things. How do we put together this fund? What kind of advocacy do we need to do? But to me, it seems like it all boils down to money.
Oh, Carla's back. Where'd it go?
Paula, I kind of had the same, that was kind of where I was going. I didn't want to go all the way, but, and I know someone in our group was working on an investor pool, I think. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that they mentioned that, yeah.
And that's where we started with some conversations with Ryan and his colleague at Truist. And, I'd made a proposal just to get us started to invest dollars, recognizing that to pull together any other kind of collaborative or anything was going to be a much longer process, and looking at how we could, get some capital flowing quickly for deals, that could be shovel ready. So for instance, where I've talked about Ridgewood, well, I mean, the city owns the land. We just simply have to do the RFP, right? But are there, if some of our nonprofits want to participate, will they need to have some construction capital, so that they can be one of the developers out there, and then that construction capital taken out by the permanent mortgage, right? So, we've been trying to figure out how can we get some capital flowing while we kind of solve for that larger funding X, right? So that was the thinking behind the conversation directly with Truist.
That's one of the reasons I brought self-help in, because I feel like we need somebody to manage those dollars if we're going, if we're going to go out and raise that capital to be invested, we need an entity that can do it. The city isn't in a position to play that role. I don't think our financial institutions here are either. But I also think that goes back to our conversation about a plan. It's hard to go out and raise that capital until you know what you're asking people to invest in. So, are we asking for gap financing for LIHTC deals? Are we asking for, lending dollars to build single family housing? I mean, there's a lot of different pieces of this. And like Marla said, it's Grand Central Station. We can try to we can try to have that fund do all things, or we can try to hone in on something and go out and request capital to target a specific piece of it. But we need to know what that ask is, probably before we get too much further into that conversation with folks.
So that goes back to Paul's point at the very beginning about being able to show all the different types of housing that we really need to fund. And then I guess that goes to my idea of, once we do that, prioritize which ones we want to fund and then go get the funding. Would that be a way to go at it?
Yeah,
I think so.
I think so. I think it's, sorry, Ryan, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I think that, we're kind of talking in circles around the same thing. I mean, we do need a plan. We do need to have measurables. We do need somebody that's responsible for pushing that. Marla, you asked what staff can do. I mean, there are some specific things within all that I think staff can do right now, pulling data out of the study and, the appropriate data. But, it's kind of, you said yes and before. Yeah. I mean, we need to do all these things. But I think the plan could literally be, all right, look, here's what we need. We know we need 15,000 units. Here's where we can get the most bang for the buck right away. If we think, if you can do single family homes for, 120,000 a unit, and you can do multifamily for 80,000, then maybe we focus on 80,000 because, we focus on multifamily because we can get more units right away, if that's the priority. But I think we need to know what our options are, and reach out to the community and say, look, we understand everybody wants a quarter acre and a garden in the back, but you know what, reasonably speaking, we can't do that right now. We need people to have housing right away. And the best way to do that, we need it to be on public transit, all of these things that ties into the community outreach, we all in a perfect world would love to have the following things, but we know that, and here's why we can't do all of those things. And here's why, to your point about a 10-year plan, in the first 5 years, we have to focus on just getting any unit we can out of the ground. And this is what and this is what they look like. By the way, we can get 5,000 units by rehabbing and keeping people in their homes. So we're going to fund a group to go out and rehab homes and keep people housed. We all of those things can be in there, but I think we've all kind of, from different angles, we're coming at the same issue. And I'll throw one more in there. If there are other groups out there that don't know what's going on, then we have a PR problem as well. So we need somebody to get out in front of this and let the public know we are working on this. This group does exist, and proactively, communicate out to the community. This is what we're doing. That doesn't preclude them from doing their own thing, but hey, we are doing something. And I can tell you, in the nonprofit world, I get that all the time. They have no idea we're out there working on. Our members have no idea sometimes that we're out there working every day on their behalf. And I take it as my response, that's my bad for not getting the word out to them that, hey, we are talking to the legislature. We are talking to city council about the issues that affect you. So I'm not going to set a fire. I'm not going to do a Derwin and set a fire and walk out of the room, but I will say, I think that we're close. I think it's just a matter of prioritizing. I think the measurables are really important. I think prioritization is really important. And I think that gets us to where, because, you honestly, could you even hire somebody without a plan? No, you can't. So we at least have to have the outline of what we think to communicate, if to nothing else, back to city council. Here are the priorities. Here's a timeline. And this is what we believe we need to do in this order. And this is why. And the funding obviously is a massive part of it, but to Ryan's point, you're not going to raise any funds, private or public, until you have that plan. So, that's I think in terms of our priorities, it probably is getting that hard data, pulling it out of the housing plan, getting it structured as a forward-looking, here's what we think we need to do, coming up with a timeline and saying, and here's why. And it's not just the kind of units, but where those units go, because that's also that's a political consideration as well. But I think the housing plan gives us, and even if it's imperfect data, at least it's data, and we just go from there. So does that all make sense? I mean, I think we've kind of been going in circles around the same issue.
John, you did a great job of summarizing. Thank you.
No, I think you're spot on. I think it gets back to the plan element. The thing I think I'm thinking about, what I'm thinking about more than anything is the community, the engagement process, right? So my concern is making sure that this is a real community process, and so what are the steps to initiating the development of the plan? And having that community engagement piece is critical.
Marla, sorry. What immediately comes to mind to me is anytime. So whenever there's a new, and Paul, I know very familiar with this feeling. Anytime you have a new, really major development in land development, you end up with that public meeting process, and you have the neighbors engaged, and you get immediate feedback. Or you can go as far as having a charrette if you're doing the 10-year, the comprehensive plan for the city. I think something like, you have to go into it. Anybody who's done these, you go into a big room, and you have different people from planning at different whiteboards, right? And they've got the all the plans laid out, and the community has something to look at, and you've kind of given them an outline of what you're talking about, right? So I think if we come up with for us, it could be, we're going to open this to the public. Here's what we know. We had this housing plan done. We know what our need is, from that data. But we want to engage the community, because this is data, but there's also the reality of what we're seeing, what you in the community see every day. And but I think it would be a mistake to go out before we have at least an outline of where we are, kind of here we are now. Here's where we know we need to be in 10 years. We've got to get from point A to point B, and we need your feedback. And so, for instance, just to pull one out, and only because I'm so familiar with it, we know that we need 5,000 we think we need, we don't say we know, but we think we need 5,000 apartments to be built. But we also know that most communities don't like apartments to be built right next to them. So here are the areas that we're thinking about building these, that we think make a lot of sense because they're on bus lines. Or, they have this, there's available land that can be had. And then we get the feedback on that, right? So I think if we get to a certain point where we've pulled out the data, we think we know what we want, that's when that's when we engage the community. Because that's when we start to get we start to get the pushback, because they're saying, well, what about, if we say we're going to build something on the western edge of the city, people on the eastern side might say, well, wait a minute, there's plenty of housing over there already. We need more housing over here. And we engage in those discussions and get everybody to buy in. Or we say, you know what, it makes way more sense to do on the east side because there's more available land. So we think we're going to go there. All those things, I think, is where I could be totally off, but I think that's kind of where we begin to, I think, and my internet's showing it's unstable, so if I break up, I'm sorry. But I think, so we kind of have to have a bare bone community engagement part.
What was that last part again?
I think we need to have a bare bones, kind of the skeleton of a plan before we can do the community engagement.
Well, and I agree with just about all of what John said. I do think ideally a plan needs to address what, where, how, and who. And so those different questions of what, where, how, and who are going to define who all we need to be talking to. So John just described, what and where the types of engagement we need to have on that. In terms of how and who, that might involve other folks who might potentially be involved with housing creation, housing financing, things like that. So I think the different aspects of the plan will help define who all we need to be engaging at the different parts. But at the end of the day, the plan has to address all of those to be able to communicate to everybody what their role is and what the need is and what we're going to try to do and all that.
Okay. Well, I know we got a lot to process.
Marla, let me just say, one time we talked about doing a housing summit, and we've talked about that in a lot of different places. A lot of different community people are talking about summits. We do need to pull this community together of housing, people who are advocating for housing. They just need to be a part of developing this plan. And yes, we need a skeleton, but it definitely needs to be inclusive and engage the community fully, so that nobody feels like they're left out of this. I don't know how we pull that off, but I think it is definitely that a community engagement piece is important.
And I will say, I'll just go back to the analogy of the continuum of care. It is an imperfect entity by all means, but to me, one of the strengths, at least the one I've been involved with in Guilford, is it is completely built on engagement of all the constituents, of all stakeholders, and so that it would be.
Oh, I'm sure he's got something he's trying to tell us. John, you faded out on most of that last bit.
Can you reboot or something? Because you're fading out constantly. Yeah, I don't know what you can do, but I guess he's gone.
Yeah, he may come back in. I know when I fade out like that, it'll reboot by itself sometimes.
Paul, I hear you, and I agree. I don't know how you do a summit, but after that call yesterday, I thought about the comment that was made over and over again about how we have all these silos of groups, and it seems like it would be helpful to get some of the individuals together to clear it through one group as to what all these thoughts are that these different silos have that are out there.
Yeah, and there's a lot of frustration out there too.
Yeah.
And John's point about, people need to know what we're doing. And I guess you can't talk about what you're doing if we don't quite know what we're doing yet in terms of having a plan. So it's sort of a catch-22.
Yeah, no, it is. So now the point is, I guess, where do we go from today to get a plan going, I guess would be the next question.
Um,
So
hey, John. Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
one of the things we talked about in, I think, long-term planning, get the committee names confused, is maybe trying to bring together like a group of developers to talk about what they see as the issues in being able to develop property here and kind of understand what those financing gaps are.
I think that would be a great start.
I hate that John dropped off because he probably has some of those connections.
Yeah. That would be a great start, but like that meeting that Tom and I were in yesterday, were some developers in that meeting, and they are putting together a sheet, or for lack of a better word, they're putting together something that shows all the developments that folk are doing, and they have invited people to add to that list. So they've started a list of developments, and I
Maybe
imagine
we start there then.
Yeah, it'll go around, and that would be, that would be a place to start.
Well, the other place too, I don't want to forget Paul's initial comment, is going back to the whole 16,000 and figuring out the different elements within it, where the greatest, how did you phrase it, Paul? I'll let you go back to what you said, but I think that's important to get going on.
Well, there's different layers of the types of needs we have, whether it's owner or rental, or the types of housing, multifamily, single family, group homes, or whether it's new construction or rehab or reuse, and then what kind of market segments are we shooting for? Below 50%, 50 to 80, 80 to 120. Each of those you kind of put in the layers of what's needed in each of those categories, and then that defines what strategically, we then have the strategic discussion as to, okay, which of those things do we need to be focusing on first or most urgently, or things like that.
Paul, how do you get that data? Where does that data come from in terms of knowing how many multifamily units you need, and where does that data, how is that data compiled?
Well, I think the first place is the housing needs analysis that Marla was referring to. That had a lot of data in there, and I think what she was saying is the staff could go through there and try to isolate, the needs in those areas. And I don't know right off the top of my head how much the housing needs analysis addresses all of those different categories, but I think probably a fair number of them it does.
It does.
So we just need.
The primary focus was on affordable.
Yep.
But it talks about all of the different income segments and the tenure types.
Yep.
Marla, is that needs analysis that FEH did? Is that the one you're talking about, or
no? It's the one we did 2 years ago with Enterprise Community Park.
Oh, Enterprise, yeah.
Yeah, that really big one. Yeah, that goes into that. Mm-hmm.
Somebody mentioned that yesterday.
Tom is showing us his. Yeah, that's what has the data, and they did a whole lot of in-depth stuff with HUD data and a whole lot of real detailed analysis stuff that as a staff we can't do, but they got that information in there. That's the basis.
Yeah.
Of what we've been doing. We've used that as our jumping off point.
And then in terms of the where, you've got that stuff that the planning department did about where land is and how it's zoned and things like that. And there would need to be some processing of, what makes the most sense and all that. But you got some basic information there to draw from as well.
Marla, if your staff, for instance, isn't right now they may be focused someplace else, is there another entity that could pull that data into a format that we need? I'm thinking about someone like CCM or or some entity like that.
either them or maybe potentially a PTRC.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, we don't have a research staff, so we don't have the technical capacity in our department.
Yeah.
It's just not the kind of stuff that we do. I mean, I can, and I mean, and we're short of staff, so it's going to be on me to try to go in here and try to extract some information. But I mean, I don't think that we need to actually go back and do another deep dive for data that Enterprise did for us just 2 years ago, right? I think we have, I think, a lot of what we need already. It's just highlighting that, you know, or extracting that into a separate, maybe standalone.
Like a one-sheeter. We need like a one-sheeter. Like, and that to me seems like a good starting place. You know, getting that done would be an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I mean that is doable. I mean that's not an issue. Yeah, that's not an issue at all.
Marla, Aaron will probably kill me for saying this, but you might see if they have anybody who could help with that too. So.
Sure, absolutely.
We didn't hear that, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, we'll start kind of outlining what maybe some of the initial items are that have been discussed about, you know, different strategies and how we start to kind of compile some baseline information. And then we'll provide that back to you, and then just kind of figure out, okay, what's the next step with that. So we're almost at 11:30. Do you all want to take some time to go through the updates? And then we also need to talk about certainly our meeting schedule for next year. So kind of guide me on where you might want to go next.
Well, could I just jump with a thought about the next meetings? Because we seem to have made some interesting strides today as a group together, as opposed to the subcommittees. Would it make any sense to have our next meeting another, you know, whole group meeting and not split into subcommittees?
Sure, we can do that. I know we were already scheduled not to meet in December at all. So we could, you know, just reconvene again in January as the full group. And that's one of the questions. I mean, is the format, do you want to keep a similar format where it's every other month for the full group and then in the off months for the working groups? You know, that was one of the questions is, do you still like that format? As well as, do you still like this time of the month and this time of day?
I would ask for Derwin to think through that, but my only thought is for right now, since I feel like we did make some strides today, that it would be great if we could just bring the whole group back for our next scheduled meeting and not break up into subcommittees.
Okay.
And then whatever everybody wants to do after that, I don't know, but I just thought that might make some sense.
Well, we can, if you want, we can, you know, meet, what is this, the third Friday? So we could meet the third Friday of January. I'm almost concerned I'm on vacation that day, but at any rate, we can schedule it for the third Friday. I think that's when we traditionally meet. And then, you know, revisit the whole yearly calendar conversation. Because I just know a lot of people are starting to put the dates on their calendar for next year, you know, so we can go on and save our days or protect our days. But we can carry this over to the January meeting and then, you know, see what the consensus is. Anybody else have any thoughts or feedback on just the schedule in general for next year, or, and having the full, I think this year we did the full meeting in January, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it's odd months, it's the full group, even months, it's the committees. So I think we did meet in January as a full group this year. Any thoughts from anyone else?
I agree with the approach y'all just outlined.
I'm sorry, say again?
I agree with the approach y'all just outlined.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll go up to the top then if we can for a few minutes. With long-term planning, of course, you should have received the glossary of terms from April before she left, right? And I think we're going to continue to build those out. And we're also planning to put them on our website, on our webpage, so that, again, people generally who want to learn more about what we're doing and what this work is, it's more readily accessible to the public. But I want to make sure everybody got that. Did you all get an email with the terms?
Yes, I did.
Yes.
Okay, good. And then the other avenue, topic rather, on here was the development resources, and we have self-help, and then we have other. We've kind of talked a little bit about the self-help, and I guess list maybe being other. Ryan, any other thoughts, or anyone else on the committee, other thoughts about the conversation there? No?
I don't have anything to add to what I shared earlier. I don't know if Derwin's on the committee. I don't know if Lisa or Paula's on. Paula, did I miss anything that we talked about?
Okay, I'm trying to go back over the notes because we should have gotten a copy of our notes as well. We had talked about a marketing
I think you
plan.
covered.
Okay. Okay. Then I think the next update we were going to have was on the housing stock. I reached out to planning staff, and they have started the research on what other communities around the state are doing, and where we are vis-a-vis the other communities, and maybe what might be necessary. Their goal is to provide just some information to council in January, not necessarily any particular recommendation yet, but I think their initial charge was to go do some research and bring back some kind of analysis of what's happening in other places and how we stand in relation to those. So their goal is to do that, go back to council with that research in January.
Marla, does that have to do with accessory dwellings or something else?
Yeah, that's the accessory dwellings.
Okay.
So the plan is to go back to the General Government Committee, General Government Community Development and Housing Committee. And that would be then the second Monday of January, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, Tuesday, I'm sorry. The second Tuesday, it should be, of January. I'll reconfirm the date and make sure you all have that, but that's the goal, is to go back to the council committee at their January meeting. I know we've talked a little bit about the community land trust. I know at one point we had talked about a site visit. Of course, I guess we keep hoping that COVID will abate, but I guess one other possible strategy in terms of really doing a site visit is we just take our own cars. And so I don't know if that's something that you all still want to pursue, early next year. And certainly it can, become a conversation piece in January if you do, in terms of maybe targeting a certain date or something to do that, but we might have to caravan to Durham if if you all still want to do that. Any thoughts about that?
Let me ask, in terms of follow-up, we knew there were potentially some groups in town that were interested in possibly becoming a community land trust here. Have there been any more discussions about that?
With the groups?
Yeah, at local groups.
No, there were a couple of people from one neighborhood in particular who participated in the presentation that Selena made. And they needed to go back to their neighbors and have a conversation about next steps and what to pursue. I think there were some elements of what Selena shared that, gave them a little bit of pause because of all that it takes to stand one up. So I think that at the neighborhood level, they had a little, I don't want to call it soul searching, but they needed to have more conversation.
Yeah.
And then there was another group I understood that was interested. They weren't a part of the presentation, but I understand that group has gone through some change in their membership or their leadership. And so they don't seem as far along conversationally about it as the initial group that I mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing I was thinking of is if there was a group that seemed pretty interested in this, that maybe when things got a little bit better with COVID, maybe we could all arrange for a visit over there and actually see some things. Otherwise, I get over to Durham every once in a while, and I always enjoy going over there to see what's been happening. And if we did do a sort of a caravan or whatever, I guess it'd be good to get from the Community Land Trust some sites to go and see. But I'd certainly be willing to do that.
Okay. And I can let them know once we've settled on a potential date to go. If we're going to try to caravan, or whatever, I can certainly pass that along to the couple of people who participated in the presentation, just in case they'd like to tag along. So that's no problem. So maybe this can be another agenda item in January to start a discussion in earnest about possible timeframes to go. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe by then, Tom will have an idea when we can get our vaccines.
That's right.
I was very happy to turn 65 and get into the more eligible doses timing.
Oh, that's right. The first round of doses or second round.
I didn't think I'd be happy about being 65, but now I am.
Were there any additional, we'll come back to some additional conversation on the land trust if you like in a minute, because I did have that down as a larger discussion piece. But you'll also see here the housing conditions survey, and that is a targeted set of neighborhoods north and east of downtown that are part of the For Everyone Home initiative that Paula and I are part of. These are neighborhoods where there is the concern of potential displacement. And For Everyone Home, of course, is focused on creating policies to prevent displacement. And so, a few things. We talk a lot about our housing stock, the age of it, the condition of it, and so forth. while the Community Development Department has some anecdotal, if you will, information about the condition of stock because of the number of applications we get for rehab loans, we don't have a good sense generally of the condition of our stock here in Winston, where our goal is to not only create more housing, but to preserve what we have. We have to understand, though, just what the conditions are so that our council can make some informed decisions around how do we attack preserving units and finding the resources to do it. So in some respects, to the extent we talk about the possibility of a housing bond in a few years, having an understanding of the need can help inform maybe how big that ask needs to be of the taxpayers. So we're targeting these particular areas. Volunteers will go out. There is an application that they'll be using on their phone. It's a proprietary application that enables them from the sidewalk or the street to, rate the roof, soffits, eaves, windows, doors, siding, different elements of the envelope from the street. So they won't go onto the property to check the entire house, but to at least give us some idea of what the stock is like, what's at risk for loss if we don't intervene, right? Understanding what's out there, then does our department do a ramp up targeted focus to do more rehab in those areas if the people are willing to fill out the application and take on the debt, that comes along with it if they're not eligible for a grant. So that is something that will be starting in a few weeks in one of 5 targeted areas. We have also developed a questionnaire and we're trying to figure out who we can partner with, ideally neighborhood associations, but we may be looking for some other volunteers who could actually go and leave this questionnaire on each door in the neighborhood. And the questionnaire is also going to be available online that asks questions about the inside of the house. Now that questionnaire for the inside of the house does not have any place to put your name or your address. So it's going to be totally anonymous. The only thing is we'll know which sector of the 5 that we're surveying that survey came from. Because a lot of times, you can drive by a house and it may look okay, but on the inside, as we've learned with some of the applications we have, there are holes in the floor, the foundation is caving in. So there are all kinds of issues. And so we're really trying to get our arms around, what the conditions are that people are living in, because that's also additional information that I think the council can understand as it decides what it wants to do in terms of asking for another bond initiative, or do we take our federal allocation and maybe target it in a certain area this year and then move to another area next year? But it helps just inform strategy and investments. So again, those are going to kick off in a couple of weeks. There's a community meeting on Zoom tonight to kind of explain what the initiative is and solicit volunteers to do the surveying of the exterior structures or exteriors of the structures. Paula, do you want to add anything to that? Because Paula's intimately involved in this as well.
No, I don't, other than this particular assessment would probably spur some other interest in other parts of the community where people are looking at, this whole housing issue. So there may be some, and not that the city has to fund this, but there may be some other initiatives that spring up out of this particular pilot.
And any questions for us about the survey?
Sounds great.
Okay.
Marla, I'm going to have to jump off in a couple of minutes, so if you want to quickly go over our subcommittee.
Sure, sure. So I had a call with Novant, and they shared just on the screen their map that they had done in terms of where a lot of their frequent flyers of the ER live. And there is some overlap with the city's neighborhood revitalization strategy area. I was advised that they are probably about maybe close to 6 months out before they can really do anything in earnest. They were still excited about an opportunity at least to have employees do some community service in the neighborhoods. And this housing condition survey was one of the first ideas we had that maybe their employee volunteers could participate in. So I think there might still need to be some conversation about whether they can. Because again, the idea for us was they would just simply put them on the doors, right? And then we would try to engage the neighborhood association and take responsibility for meeting its neighbors and picking the interior surveys up and then getting them to the city. So I connected Laura's engagement team with Neighbors for Better Neighborhoods and Paula so that they could have that conversation about how to potentially collaborate on distributing those interior conditions questionnaires or surveys. But so I think at this juncture, Tom, we probably could maybe circle back, you and I, to Gary Gunderson and pick up our conversation with him, since we know that Novant is a little ways out before they're able to make any kind of commitment. I think Gary was a little more ready to have more in-depth conversation. So maybe that's something you and I can collaborate on after Thanksgiving.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I wanted to try and get with you about. He's very anxious, and he was part of the group that I listened in on yesterday. And I'm a little concerned that he's getting pulled in more to that group because they're presenting some shovel-ready projects. And that was one of the reasons I kind of was saying, we need to try and figure out what all these organizations are doing. As Paula said, they are going to present this sheet of projects. Paula, did they give us an idea of when they're going to have that?
No, I think that, there were quite a few people on that call yesterday, but I think that those developers on the call are going to start filling that in right away.
Yeah.
And so when it'll be ready, I don't know.
Yeah, but hopefully we'll have it for our next big meeting in January, because I think that would be something to really kind of start pulling all these groups together and say, hey. So anyway, Marla, Gary, we can definitely get with him. I think he's going to want to go back to the point that we've raised over and over again today. He's going to want to know our plan. He's really ready to go.
And certainly, I think if we actually go through a formal planning process, which I hope we do, he would be a great stakeholder to be at the table. Yeah. Okay.
All right, well, I'm going to have to run. This has been a great meeting, and I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving, okay? And be healthy.
You too, Tom. Talk to you afterwards.
Take care.
All right, you too.
See you, Tom.
See ya.
Okay. So really, that was the last update item. I think we've kind of spent a lot of time under the discussion category. But I'll pause in case there are some other comments or insights you'd like to share with the Community Land Trust. I know was it you, Ryan, who talked about how interesting it was to know that they did rental? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something I've heard of a CLT doing before. I know it's really been focused on that shared equity and the home ownership piece, but thought it interesting, especially from the potential sustainability of the organization.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Definitely, definitely. Anything else of note? No? Okay. Well, we kind of touched on the 2021 meeting schedule. Obviously, we'll be virtual until we're not. So that means January will be virtual. And I will confirm the meeting date after our call today and get that out to get it on your calendars. Any additional questions, feedback before we close? All right. Well, thank you all for your time this morning, and I hope you all have a nice, pleasant Thanksgiving holiday. I know they're going to look different for a lot of us, but hopefully it'll be what you like.
Happy Thanksgiving to you as well.
Yes,
All right.
you too.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
All right.